implementation is we've actually put the entire meat of the request in a try. And then in the finally block is where that gets cleaned up. So it doesn't matter if, you know, 5 lines down the stack trace, somebody calls return instead of do next. Before it actually returns control to the application server, the code in that finally block will execute, no matter what. Now there's a few exceptions to that rule, which are, I've never actually seen duplicated, but there are people that theorize that there are ways to get around executing code in the final block. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay. Now go over here.
Just to get a bit more visibility into your development process.
Mm-hmm.
So let's assume that ESAPI provides all the security functionality I need.
Mm-hmm.
What secure development practices do you follow yourselves? And what kind of security reviews do you go through beyond it's open and anyone can look at it? And maybe what kind of update mechanisms would you have? Because ultimately it's another library, it's another third-party code that I have to put into my code.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So vulnerabilities happen.
Yep, absolutely. So this is a very, very valid point and something that's come up numerous times on the mailing list is how do we manage ourselves? As a development team, I know that I personally, Jim and Kevin, the three of us who are kind of the core development team, we pretty heavily review code that gets committed. Especially if it gets committed from a contributor outside of the core development team. We get patches from people, you know, whoever. So there's a pretty heavy manual review process. We're still kind of a baby project in terms of our process. We just recently, as far as getting updates out, so say somebody does find a vulnerability, we fix it, or somebody fixes it, we check it in, and then the next the obvious question is how do we push that out, right? How do we get that out to people who are using it? So with the Java project, we just started using Maven Central as a distribution hub, and we'll be doing continuous integration builds, so snapshot builds to our Maven repository on a regular basis. So that kind of addresses the patching question. Other than that, you know, I think that we're still in the phases of our process where we're still trying to get it figured out what the best processes are. I think that where we're at right now, we do a pretty good job of doing it manually, but there's a lot of things that need to be documented about our processes and made open like that.
So I guess another question in that case is when you get vulnerability, do you patch it horizontally across all the supported platforms as well, or?
Generally speaking, yeah, and it actually brings up a really good point where, you know, in today's world, there are things, so some of those languages are not at the same level as Java, as far as their completeness, as far as their support. And that's pretty clearly documented on those project pages. But generally speaking, we all talk to each other. And so if somebody comes to the Java Google repository and drops a bug in that says, oh, hey, there's this issue over here, generally that's going to ripple across all the others. Again, probably an area we could use some improvement. Right now, it's really just kind of the three of us on Java that are kind of running the show, and then we let that kind of trickle down to the other implementations. So another thing to address one of your questions that actually just dawned on me. So we're getting ready to release 2.0 general availability here within hopefully the next month or two. We're currently awaiting the results of our, the NSA is actually reviewing mainly the encryption in the new ESAPI. We completely rewrote the encryption, the reference implementation of the encryption. So there is a lot of peer review and third-party review happening as well. You know, I can think of a handful of times when I've seen people completely non-affiliated with OWASP or the ESAPI doing code review or going through and saying, oh, hey, here's this thing, right, this should probably be fixed, right? So
That's
it's happening. It probably needs to be more documented. But
I guess what I'm leading to is, you mentioned yourself that maybe right now you're still kind of figuring out the processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at what point do you say you guys are going to be mature enough for large software organizations to start picking it up and use it in their environment?
I think about the same time we release GA. Because as soon as we go GA with 2.0, we're going to have to address those concerns. So we've all got things that we've done, and those things will, about that same time, will become standard practice, will become process. Jim, you got something to add?
Edward, I'd like to add that the most important thing we do in the ESAPI project around our process is 120% visibility in everything we do. We don't have offline conversations. Everything we're doing is on the ESAPI dev and user list. When we make a mistake, we're very, very public about it. We're also it's only really 3 of us who are the core Java developers for ESAPI, and we found a small mistake yesterday. I'm patching it tomorrow, and I'm releasing the release candidate tomorrow. So we're small, we're agile, we're using formal source code repositories, we're using Maven, we're completely public on everything we communicate. We patched up incredibly fast, and we're responsible about calling something production. ESAPI 2.0 is still, as a release candidate, we're waiting for the NSA to finish their review. The other thing is that as we hit, as we hit a final release candidate for 2.0, we have a lot more companies using it right now. Already today, I know of 5 top-tier banks, 2 NGOs, a whole bunch of giant enterprises who are using this imperfect library, and it's saving them a huge amount of money, because especially the encoder, the validator, our utilities. These are all production-ready, highly scalable chunks of code that we're already using in sites that are taking millions upon millions of hits per day. So we have work to do, like any open source project, but I think we're in part production quality for most of the library, and we'll be completing that as 2.0 comes to GA. Is that fair, Chris?
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
And we love your advice. As more companies like Symantec begin to adopt ESAPI, we're very open to your advice in helping us fine-tune our process. Even better, if a company of your size is gonna depend on ESAPI, this is a multi-million-dollar topic in your company, I'm sure. You know what, you've got to dedicate half of one of your guys' time to participating in the project. It would help Symantec. It would help the ESAPI project. It will help the whole world, which is Symantec's mission. So we would love your participation. Crack the whip. Help us become better. We need your help.
Sorry, just to add to that. So basically, what I'm leading to is understanding the risks of using this as any other third-party software, right?
Certainly.
And the better visibility there is into the development processes, and because we still find bugs in open source code, which is supposedly open, reviewed by all the security community every day, right? So that's why better understanding these processes, what reviews you go through, what development practices you follow yourself, I think that could lead to better understanding of what risk I'm going to be taking as a company by adapting this.
And I'll talk to you a lot more about this offline as well. I'll drop you some email. Again, I'm honest, open, transparent about where ESAPI is good, where it's effective, where we need work. I'll be glad to have a detailed discussion with you offline about that.
And you'll find that just about all of us on the ESAPI, both the ESAPI dev and the ESAPI users mailing list, completely open to those conversations at any point in time. Go ahead.
I'd like to find out more information on what you mentioned on larger companies. How do they deploy this? What was their process? And even during this point, you talked about patches. How does the companies that already deployed this to all the development teams, how do they also deploy these patches? Are they updating it regularly? Do they wait? And I guess my bigger question is, what are the details in a larger company and how they implement these patches? What were the problems?
There were no problems. It's built. The problems are we have too many dependencies right now. So we have like 20 or 30 additional very common third-party libraries in Java. This is a problem with Java development in general. You're a Java development shop as well. How many jars do you need to run your app? 40, 50? So we have a lot, we're doing such complex stuff. we do have too many dependencies right now, and some folks have complained about that. But honestly, most organizations that I've seen use ESAPI, they use it for two main purposes today. In the encoding, by the way, is doing the validation. So they use encoding and the validators, and then utilities for caching the signals and stuff like that. That stuff is turnkey ready to go now. If you're used, and same with logging, I would dare say. Most people don't need an authentication layer. They're already doing SAML or something else. So I don't know anyone who's using the ESAPI authentication abstraction today. The access control is just an interface. So some people have their own methodology and use our interface. Where I think ESAPI's big role today is, we're not documenting this well enough, Kelly. Where ESAPI is brilliant today is the encoder, the validator, and the utilities. And I already see that in use in, again, 5 top major banks, 2 big financial NGOs.
Well, I think you touched on kind of a really valid point here, and this does speak kind of to the deployment question and the deployment problem. The ESAPI is not meant to be, or it's not intended to be a one-size-fits-all solution. You know, and I can't think of very many people that I know of that are using it in its entirety. I highly doubt there's anybody out there using every single component in the ESAPI in their application. The goal is to be able to deploy it in a componentized manner, right? And that's the reason we've gone to Maven. One of the reasons we've gone to Maven as a deployment mechanism. It automatically addresses the problem of dependencies, and it automatically resolves the problem of caching. I can set up as a development shop, I've got my local Maven repository that talks to Maven Central. It's checking for updates all the time. If there's an update, I can have it set up so that A, it says, oh hey, this library's been updated, if you want to update it. Or B, it can just download the updated version, and then it's at the local repository level where those decisions are made. So at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do with Maven is solve those deployment problems. Deployment is always a problem. Any Java application, as I'm sure you're aware, deployment of dependencies, managing dependencies, it's a huge problem. That problem's already been solved by people far more intelligent than I am at solving the problem. So really, we're just kind of trying to build on the work that other people have done to solve those issues. Does that answer your question?
Just wanted to add.
Definitely, I'd like, if you want to talk a little more in detail later as far as the deployment strategy, having done it, I'd be more than happy to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Right, there's a great document that I saw on the ESAPI website called Design Patterns that talks exactly about what you're asking to think about, you know, when you actually finger to the keyboard, how are you going to integrate it? There's a bunch of different approaches.
Absolutely. So there's, and I believe that's Mike Boberski's work. Mike actually did a really, really great run of documentation. And so there is some really great, the design patterns, or I think that's what he called it, the design patterns, happy design patterns doc. Very, very good overview high-level overview of how to do it, and kind of the right patterns you want to use in action. How much, do you know what time this is supposed to be on? We got 5 minutes? Okay. So we got about 5 more minutes. Is there any more questions? See, I got more questions now. Get over here.
Yeah, I'm new to ESAPI. First question is I want to know what you are referring to exactly the reference implementation. Is it implementation of the API set?
Absolutely.
Is it some whole demo app that actually use?
It is an implementation of the interface that right now ships with the ESAPI.
Is there any like some holistic, some big, more realistic demo app that actually utilize?
Yeah, it's on my laptop. No, there actually is. There is I forget what it's a SAPI swing set, which is that was the intent of that project. And unfortunately, it's a little out of date.